Let me see. There we go. Pulling up the right screen. All right. So let's call this meeting to order. Gaveling in the March 25th, 2021 meeting of AMATS Policy Committee. The time is 1:31. Apologize for the 1 minute delay. We'll do a roll call. Ms. Altel.
Here.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Mr. Schutte.
Schutte is present.
Ms. Heil.
Here.
All right. We have at least 3 members. We have a quorum. Craig, will you please do the public announcement?
Yes, indeed. AMATS meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. If we have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or the consultant. After that, the committee will be given a chance to discuss the matter. And then after that, the public will be invited to comment. As you know, we are using Teams Live to allow the public to dial in, so there is that delay. And we'll ask Christine Schutte to keep us aware of that. In addition, please, if any members who are online here, if you could go into the chat and you'll see the sign-up sheet that Christine has presented there so that you can do the survey for the demographic information that FHWA likes us to keep track of. I'd appreciate it. We'd appreciate it. So, and that's it, sir.
Thank you. Excuse me. Do we have an approval of the agenda?
Schutte moves to approve.
Second.
Do we have any changes?
Actually,
Hearing none. Are there any objections to adopting the agenda? Hearing none. The agenda is approved. For agenda item 4, what? Nice. Oh, my table says 4, but agenda item 4. We have before us the minutes of the. That's an error. We have before us the minutes of the February 25th, 2021 minutes for approval. Do we have a motion?
move to approve. Weddleton.
Schutte will second.
Thank you. Are there any changes or discussion? Hearing none, are there any objections to approving the minutes? Hearing none, the February 25th, 2021 minutes are approved. So I'm just checking a couple of different sections here. All right. Craig, can you? Okay, my script is correct. Moving on to action item 5A, the Citizens Advisory Committee seat nomination. Craig, will you be presenting on this?
Yes, I will.
Thank
So as you remember, our AMATS CAC has a member from each assembly district, and we have had Assembly District 4 open up, and Diana Evans has been was the suggested appointment for that seat. That Assembly District is Ms. Zolotel and Mr. Rivera's Assembly District. So her name was suggested, and we took that to the TAC, and they recommended that you folks approve her. You can see by her resume, she has been in Alaska for a while. She has an engineering background, and she has commented on AMATS items for a while now, so she's a bit familiar with the things that we do, which is really helpful. So we are excited that we have an opportunity to add her to our Citizens Advisory Committee. And the TAC took action 2 weeks ago and recommended her appointment to you folks to recommend approval.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
You know, Weddleton, I have one comment here. She mentions the Chugach Park Access Coalition for access to Chugach State Park, and I feel horrible that I have no idea what this group is. Something's very important to me. I have to get in touch with.
I apologize. I can offer no insight into what that coalition is either.
Quick comment from Ms. Zalatil. I don't have the answer to Mr. Weddleton's question, but the CAC would be really in a good position to get Ms. Evans as a member. She is an active individual and spends a lot of time critically analyzing the issues that she engages with. So, and she's a great neighbor. She lives in my neighborhood. So I think she'd be a true asset.
Thank you, Ms. Altel. Any comments from the public? And we'll pause a few minutes and wait for the go ahead.
No public comments.
Thank you. What is the will of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Are there any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Item 5B, the Citizens Advisory Committee name change. Craig, will you be presenting on this?
I will start and we'll go from there. So Mr. Hess, who is our municipal ombudsman, also a member and current chair of the AMATS Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, sent me a letter, which is before you right there, requesting that that AMATS consider changing the name, removing the word citizen from our Citizens Advisory Committee. We've had some discussion here at the Policy Committee before. The Technical Advisory Committee took up the matter and ended up tabling it with the idea that if someone were to come forward with some evidence of when people might have felt disenfranchised due to the name citizen on the Citizen Advisory Committee, then they would consider looking at it, but they tabled it at their meeting. But as you know, we have a Policy Committee member who asked that we discuss it, so that is why it's before you today. Mr. Hess has dialed in and is available, I guess, for questions or comments. But that's about all I can say about that.
Ms. Weddleton, I have a couple of questions, maybe to Daryl.
John?
What are the requirements for having a seat on this commission? I think there's certain, like one seat for a bicyclist, one person for someone who's bike ped advocate or something like that. Can you review those for me?
I can't answer that question. I know there's a seat for each assembly district, is my understanding.
Okay.
I'm grabbing that real quick, Mr. Weddleton. I don't want to give you the incorrect information, but there is one from each assembly district. There's one from the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, the Chugach Eagle River Chamber of Commerce. Then I'm trying to grab it real quick and not having it right at my fingertips, and I apologize that I didn't have this on hand as I prepared. But let me see if I can find it real quick. you can, if you want to discuss a little bit as I track it down here.
Well, you know, I would a few comments. You know, I listened to the tax conversation, and you know, sometimes you say, well, if there's not a problem, why do it? But on the other hand, with things like this, it's like you may never know it's a problem, even if it is. You know, if there are people who, you know, a lot of our use of our buses, for example, are lower income people, probably leaning towards, you know, recent immigrants and so on, who may not be citizens, but would be good representatives on the CAC because of their familiarity with kind of that aspect of our transportation system. And I don't really see a harm in doing this. You know, we have requirements, you know, that you have to be a resident, it sounds like, if you're an assembly district, or you know, the Chamber of Commerce is supposed to be anybody, doesn't have to be a citizen of Anchorage, but
so here are the membership. One member from each assembly district, that's 6 seats. A member from the Federation of Community Councils, Anchorage Chamber, Chugach River Chamber, someone from Planning and Zoning, and a member from J-Bear. That's how we have it delineated right now.
Do you have any other questions, Mr. Whittleton?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I don't see a problem with the kind of cracking the door open a little bit more. It seems like a little bit more friendly and doesn't really hurt anything. So I'd support the name change.
Ms. Altel, you have a question?
I have a comment, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I support the name change, and partly because the makeup of the CAC is really the community more than citizens. When we have chambers of commerce involved, it certainly suggests that that's the community giving input or being involved in this committee. I actually think it could work on the flip side too, that if it's called a community advisory committee, that we might get more community groups to engage with the advisory committee. I know we do have some, I believe, like Anchorage comes to mind, but it just seems to be more of a true reflection of what the advisory committee is doing. It's engaging with the community on various levels, and certainly isn't restricted to anyone under the term citizen. I also think that the argument or the rationale that we don't see any chilling effect is one where it doesn't hold a lot of weight with me, because people who may not engage may not complain that they don't think that they can engage either. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments by the committee?
I would say, following Ms. Altel's comments there about getting more community groups, an active community group with many transportation things has been the Anchorage Citizens Coalition, and maybe we'll get do this change and then get the name of that group changed to Anchorage Community Coalition. If Cheryl Richardson's listening.
All right. Are there any comments from the public? Again, we'll pause for a few minutes.
There are no public comments.
Thank you. What is the will of the committee?
I move to change the name of the Citizens Advisory Committee to Community Advisory Committee.
I'll second that. Whittleton.
Okay, so there's a motion to change the name of Citizens to Community. There's a motion. Discussion has been had, so
I'd like more discussion, actually, now that I look at it. No, I support it. I think, but looking at Dale's, for some reason I came into this and even at the TAC meeting was thinking that it was to change it from Citizens Advisory Committee to Community Advisory Committee. But reading Daryl's letter here, he just has dropped the word citizen, so it would just be Advisory Committee, which I suppose is okay, but we do have a freight advisory committee and a port advisory, to designate it a little bit different from those, I think is a benefit. Daryl, did you have a preference?
So and further down in the letter, I said the policy committee could consider using residents or public, but I believe it was the planning director, Michelle, came up with a great idea, community advisory committee, because in so many previous documents, minutes, it refers to the CAC. So those the acronym would still be relevant for past historic documents. And community, as Ms. Zolotel said, truly reflects the intent of this group is to be a community group.
Good, thank you.
So we have a motion to change it from citizens to community. We have a second. So through the chair, I'd like to request a vote by name, please. Ms. Zalatel,
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton,
Yes.
Mr. Schutte,
Yes.
Ms. Heil,
No.
and the state says, representative of the department says no as well. So the motion carried 3-2. Craig, are there any other action items?
None that I'm aware of.
So moving on to item 7A, AMATS project and plan updates. Greg, will you or somebody else be presenting?
I'll just real quickly let you folks know a couple of things. As you know, the non-motorized plan was out for public review for a while. We have over 700, well over 700 comments received that Joni is furiously working away on helping to create a comment response summary on that. So not that we are surprised, but excited to have that much interest in our non-motorized plan. So hopefully we'll get that to you next month, but it's possible that'll be a month later, just due to the sheer volume of comments, but great interest in that. And it's always good when we have a lot of involvement by the public on our plans. It shows they're interested. So we'll let you know that. In addition, as you know, we have TIP Amendment 2 out for public comment right now. I did get 3 requests for some changes to the TIP. It must be the 5307 split letter must have been signed between the railroad and the municipality because we have some changes to Table 10, which, as you know, is outside of the AMATS allocation, but it's those FTA 5307 funds that are for that both the railroad and the public transit department use, and they have some changes that they would like. In addition, we have some changes for the AMATS allocation, and so some of all 3 of those, the changes to the AMATS allocation and changes for the railroad and the public transportation department to their funds, all would require an amendment. So we could either do another amendment, which, as you know, takes a very long time, or we could roll those into this. I've looked through the Code of Federal Regulations, and I looked through all of the AMATS operating agreement and our public involvement plan, and I don't see anything anywhere that suggests we cannot just roll those changes into this amendment, and then as it goes through the rest of the way, which includes through the TAC and the policy committee, and then also through the Anchorage Assembly before it comes back to the policy committee, they would all see those changes. The public would have opportunities to comment at those stages. I think in the interest of time and the fact that most of those changes are related to FTA funds and not the AMATS allocation, this is a good way to go. But I just want to let you folks know that we just found out about a lot of those changes just recently. So we'll be bringing that back to you next month when we bring the TIP amendment back before you. It will require that the interagency air quality consultation team get together and look at the changes and agree that we don't have to really redo that. As far as I can tell, everything would be falling. They're outside of the allocation, or they're not such that requires a new conformity changing there. So, but of course, that's up to the air quality interagency consultation team. So, if you have any questions on that, that's about it for that part, as far as I know.
Weddleton has a question.
Sir.
So there's that $11 million from the feds that came out in January or something, and I think the rule was it had to be in our tip. And is that is it something that, what would we do if there was some reason to use that for something that's not either not in the tip at all, or would be maybe something that's in there but could be modified? What's the process?
So those funds have to be in our tip in order to be spent in our area. So if it's something that's already in the tip, we're good to go, and all we do is just need to reflect the funding, and depending on the dollar figure, if it's more than 50% of the allocation or the total project cost, then it would need to be an amendment. If there are funds, for example, if we have a $3 million phase of a project right now that we're planning on using the AMATS allocation, and we're going to replace it with this, that doesn't have to be, that's just the same dollar figure, it's just using a different source of funds. If it's a project, if we're wanting to add a project that's not in the current tip, we would need to do a full-blown amendment to add a new project in.
Okay, and who decides what that money is spent on? What's the process?
Well, we believe that everyone is in agreement that AMATS decides the allocation of that funding, but we don't have that 100% sure. I mean, I know the state is looking at it. The guidance from the feds is not crystal clear. So I understand that there's, I understand why the state's not 100% positive that's the way it goes, but we're pretty sure that it sounds like they're in agreement that those funds come into the state of Alaska for areas over 200,000 population, and clearly that's the Anchorage area. So we're pretty sure that that's what that means, but I don't have anything in writing yet.
But what's your sense on when we would start looking at what to do with that?
I've requested something in writing about 2 weeks ago. I'm happy to request that. As soon as I hear we can spend it here, you guys will get to decide it.
Can we add that to the next agenda? And if we don't know the answers to deal with it, then we'll move on. But at least we'll have something on the agenda so we can get started as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, I believe it's 2024 that we have to have those funds spent by. So I'm just going to, just double check that.
That's correct, Greg.
Yeah, 2024. Yeah, September 30th, 2024. That have to be obligated by then.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. I see Mr. Schutte has his hand up.
Yes, sir, Mr. Schutte.
Thank you. Craig, could you restate or say again the answer to the question that Mr. Weddleton asked, which is if we use a portion of this previously unanticipated funding to contribute to a project in the TIP, but let's say it's a $3 million project in the TIP, and we for this construction year, but we want to do this year and next year all at once. Does that require a modification to the TIP, or is it just that's the funding source and we're doing two calendar years at once?
So my understanding is if we have a project that has a $3 million phase in 2022, and we're planning on spending our surface transportation block grant or our AMATS allocation on it, and now instead we're going to use these what they're referring to as CRISA funds on it, that's not an amendment because it's the dollar figure's the same. It's just you're changing what flavor it is. That would not be an amendment. So.
Okay, and then with the balance of our normal allocation, where does that go? Do we get to reassign that somewhere else?
You get to reassign that somewhere else. So there are a couple projects,
Thanks.
for example, you know, a couple of the non-motorized projects, the downtown trail connection and Fish Creek to the ocean, I think some people are calling it. There are a couple of projects that we've talked about that might need some additional funds. Those would be opportunities where that additional funding could go. If the dollar figure is such that it's over 50%, obviously that'd be an amendment. But there's just some, you know, that one thing to keep in mind is that these CRISA funds don't have any match required. And one of my suggestions was looking at the planning projects that we have in the TIP. If we make those funded out of CRISA funds, we don't have to try to search around for how to come up with the match, since you can't bond for a match for planning projects.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any additional questions for item 7A?
Yes, I'm sorry, I put myself in the chat, but I guess I should raise my hand.
Yes, Ms. Alto, go ahead. Please.
Thank you. So you mentioned the surface block grants. It was my understanding that those, you know, the Anchorage would qualify independently and that it would, I mean, are we suspecting or are we anticipating a portion of surface block grant money to come in through the AMATS process as well?
The AMATS funds are the surface transportation block grants. So that's our normal source of funds. We have our, you know, 27 million or so in change that we get, 30 million, I guess now, in surface transportation block grants. That's our main bulk of our allocation. We get some of those TAP funds and we get some CMAQ funds, but our main source is those block grants. These CRISA funds include the 11 point whatever that we're hoping that AMATS is getting to decide that additional allocation.
Okay, because I got a notice that municipalities of a certain size were getting additional surface block grant funds directly. So
that's that 11.3 we're talking about right now. That's that additional amount. That's why I said earlier that the federal guidance on it is, you know, it's kind of as clear as mud sort of thing, that we're asking, okay, does this come through the state and do they decide? Does it come through the MPO because the MPO is the only one that is around with a 200,000 plus population, and they're just not that, they don't like to draw that line in the sand. So we believe that that additional 11.3 is up to AMATS to decide. I'm just waiting to get something in writing before I put us on the hook for it.
okay, and I'll forward over what I received and you can clarify if it's still the same thing, because
okay.
I was reading it as two separate things, so I appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure.
All right, any additional comments or questions for agenda item 7A?
Weddleton, but
Yes,
continuing on that, Craig, I wonder if you could, sometime between now and the next meeting or whatever, go ahead, give us a tally of maybe for each year. I suppose we could, the math wouldn't be that hard, but of what the matching amounts would be, because I think working on your suggested that maybe this 11.3 could go towards the match. You know, maybe what the, you know, if we don't change the tip, but what would be the match needed for each, you know, through 2024? And then also that you mentioned a couple that may be underfunded in the tip, and give us a list of which projects might be underfunded and how much that might be. But that would help us. I mean, those seem like good suggestions. It would help us kind of start the conversation.
Just so I'm clear, did you want that beforehand or when we have our next meeting?
Yeah, but you know, on schedule for our next meeting, a week before,
right.
Whatever.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If that wraps up item 7A, Craig, moving on to agenda item 7B, project to amend Title 21 parking regulations. Craig, will you present here?
I am going to leave that to the experts. We have Tom Davis here to share with us, and Tom Davis with Long Range Planning, you're probably well aware of, and Elizabeth Appleby with our current planning section of the planning department. They are here to present. So I believe we're starting with Tom.
Hi, this is Tom Davis. Can you hear me over my dog?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm here with Elizabeth Appleby, and we're part of an interagency team just to give the AMATS Policy Committee a heads up about a project that we're beginning to consult with the Technical Advisory Committee as well as the BPAC regarding this project. And I'll just give you an overview today and let you know about what we're doing as it relates to the MTP. If you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and share what we have. We are working with a number of groups this month and next month to help calibrate some reforms to our parking requirements. And not the least among those is the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee. The reason is that the parking requirements are basically at the intersection of a lot of our policies and efforts, whether it's in the realm of transportation, as well as in our land use plans. Specifically, we're working on implementing the MTP policy 6F-3, which is to work together to reduce our parking requirements where they are excessive, because they do have so many impacts across the board. We're examining some of the effects of what the current city parking requirements do. Basically, they're having a determining effect on a lot of the way we build, and it is spilling off of our individual development sites into the city as a whole, including the transportation system and the investments that you're all having to make in that system. So highlighting there, it's affecting how many housing units, what density we can get on any individual or developments. It's basically creating a more difficult, challenging, and basically making bicycle and walking and other mode choices less competitive. And it's basically inducing more driving as a result. This would be basically the result of parking requirements that are one size fits all. So any given site is required to provide a certain minimum amount of parking, depending on how many housing units you're developing or how large your office building or what have you. All across the city, there's a certain number of parking spaces required with that. And they generally cover the majority of any given property and throughout town. And so I think Anchorage is like a typical city. We have about 3 or 4 parking spaces for every car we have. So it's really affecting a litany of issues far beyond what the original intent of parking requirements were. You know, for certain parts of town, this is worse than others, particularly in urban areas like Spenard or in other urban parts of town where sites are smaller, maybe they're irregular. It's having a bigger effect on small infill developers and small businesses in those areas than it does in, maybe, South Anchorage, simply because the sites are smaller. It is sort of ironic because those tend to be, these older urban areas tend to have the areas where we're investing in the most sidewalks and transit support. If there's an example type of development that is really affecting us on the land use side of the thing, coin, it's really that it's really housing. And we're thinking that for a variety of reasons, the Title 21 requirements for parking and the demand for parking they're a little bit out of whack in a lot of cases. And so we're looking at we're examining some of the effects. For a typical development, parking and the driveways can be up to 10 to, when you have structured underground parking, even up to 30% of your development cost. And here we are in Anchorage trying to make housing pencil, and you're seeing a major effect. Apologize. When a developer is required to provide a certain minimum amount of parking, one or two spaces for even a 2-bedroom apartment unit, not only does it increase the cost, but it really induces a larger, bulkier housing unit size because of the built-in cost of the parking. Why invest in building smaller units? Even though our housing sizes are falling, and a large percentage of households don't even own 2 cars or even 1 car. So it does drive down the amount of housing that we have. We are seeing deficits now, and even with our 2040 plan, we are having trouble finding enough space to fit housing. And so this situation is particularly a problem in a city like the Anchorage Bowl. And it's inequitable. If you have a smaller household size or you have a smaller income, you are subsidizing your neighbors who own more cars, because even if you don't own a car, you're still helping pay for the parking that's built onto the site. We do allow reductions to parking requirements. However, you have to ask for them, and they are discretionary approval. They go straight up to the traffic engineer director and the planning director. And so that actually discourages a lot of applicants whose development types would actually merit a lower parking requirement. Basically, our code today basically makes it easy to provide too much parking and harder to do what our plans, both the MTP and the Anchorage 2040 land use plan, really want them to do. So we're looking at how easy it has been. So far, since we adopted our current code, there have been about 21 reductions approved annually. And that means that in the majority of developments that could have had a lower parking requirement, they didn't choose to seek a discretionary reduction. Highlighted in blue, shared parking. That's a huge opportunity. It's the second most popular type of parking reduction, but we're seeing that the biggest opportunity there for housing is to share your parking lot with another use on site or next site over that has daytime parking demand with your residential nighttime parking demand. You can really reduce the amount of parking. And so for those parts of town, those urban parts of town, we have parking reductions available highlighted in yellow. But again, there's been only 15 based on if they're on a transit route or they're near downtown or they're in midtown, where we want to have more infill and development, more of a urban design pattern. So we've seen some, what we think are, because of the code, some lost opportunities. There have been some great developments, like the one pictured here in Spenard. But this, like many other developments, even though they were eligible to get their parking down through these reductions, they did not seek a parking reduction that they could have received to reduce the amount of land area and cost for their site, in part because it's so discretionary. So we're seeking to help out those uses, those parts of town, and achieve our plans, as well as to make our development pattern a place where transit and walking and biking can be more, frankly, more competitive and attractive. Well, we have identified in our city plan those parts of town, the urban areas, the areas with more transit, the areas basically where there are opportunities to reduce the parking requirement, where we are investing a lot in frequent public transit service. And on the transportation side, we have a lot of policies and goals. These are just several of them in the MTP. Most explicitly, Action 6F is about working with the planning department to reform the parking requirements. And that's what this project is. This project is different from past parking reform efforts. We're really going to try and work with the TAC and the public to really make our, what are our decisions, this black box, how do we set parking requirements? What are they calibrated to? And just make these explicit and transparent, and so that everyone can understand and contribute to what would be appropriate parking requirements in these urban areas. The tail is currently wagging the dog. We have a goal, which is how to get to and from different land uses around town, and there's all kinds of different techniques to get there, but the one at the very bottom that's in shaded, that's the tail. That's the one technique that Title 21 really focuses on as compared to what other cities do, even what parts of Anchorage do. So looking at reforming our code to provide some balance in terms of travel demand management. Elizabeth is going to walk you through a couple of the specific ideas that we're looking at and some proposals that we are kind of touching base with different groups about this month and next. Elizabeth, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks, Tom. So this slide shows I'm going to go over a few of the things that we're looking at in this proposed code change. So one is looking at our traditional urban neighborhoods. They have a grid street layout, a little bit more density. We're looking at lowering the parking requirement by approximately 20 to 35%. We're still playing around with the exact number, and feedback from consultations such as this one are important to help us get to an exact number to put out there. We're also looking to replace 5 of our discretionary parking reductions for this area. So Tom just showed the ones that are being striked out. So we're trying not to make the code more complicated with this change. So we're proposing to get rid of some of the discretionary ones that required a parking study and to make the introduce some non-discretionary ways to get a parking reduction. So we're looking to keep the downtown exempt area that gives an exemption from minimum parking requirements. We'd like to potentially expand this area into Fairview because we know that this is also an area of low vehicle ownership. However, if we do that, we need to make sure that our on-street parking and right-of-way is still being managed to accommodate that. We're also looking at a lower parking requirement by about 10 to 20% for some of our edge urban or transit supportive development corridors. So the edge urban neighborhoods examples would be Spenard, North Star, Government Hill, and Airport Heights, just to name a few. And the map here shows areas that are a quarter mile of our bus routes. And again here, we're cutting out some of the reductions to simplify the code. So some of the alternatives that we're looking at is that non-discretionary parking reduction up to a certain percent. So you wouldn't need direct engineer approval or a parking study. We would still have some discretionary reductions, for instance, for a larger percent. And the graph to the right shows some of the TDM strategies. And we're hoping that these give options for good options for mixed use. And the ones with the new have a little new symbol. There we go. There's a little sun that shows ones that we think particularly would enhance options for mixed use. And this is the chart that Tom referenced before, where parking requirements is only one piece of the puzzle. We are looking at a couple citywide parking reforms, mostly allowing, in addition to the taxi spaces that we have already, allowing electric vehicle and ride hailing services to also count as required parking. We're looking at increasing bike parking in some of the traditional urban neighborhoods and in the transit corridor. And we also want to make sure, as a prerequisite, that we retain walkways if we do give a parking reduction. And I'll throw it back to Tom to go over where we are in the process and the next steps.
Well, I appreciate you all listening in on those highlights, and they are just highlights. There are several other possible reforms that we're looking at, but we focused on the ones most pertinent to AMATS and what we're hoping to work on with the Technical Advisory Committee and BPAC. We hope to release an initial community discussion draft in mid-April. We are currently in the midst of consulting with a variety of agencies. We have had our initial contacts with the AMATS, BPAC, and Technical Advisory Committee. We're also meeting with development experts, developers, and we're meeting with community councils beginning this month and next. There's a virtual open houses next month, but most specific to the AMATS, TAC, and BPAC is we would like to get their feedback on some specific aspects of the parking requirement, and those have to do with how we set the basic parking requirement. How forward-looking do we want to make it? How aggressively do we want to reduce the basic minimum parking requirements? And also how well we're implementing the AMATS plans. With the BPAC, we are looking at, as Elizabeth mentioned, ticking our bicycle parking requirement up a notch. Partly in response to taking the automobile parking reductions down. And so working with them to set a bicycle parking requirement that is minimally adequate to accommodate anticipated bike parking demand. That's at the stage of commenting on this initial draft. They would provide us with that feedback, and that would help us develop a public hearing draft. Comments on that public hearing draft later this year, we would be seeking the support and your comments from the two AMATS advisory committees. Those would go to Planning and Zoning Commission as it takes up this ordinance and makes its recommendations to the Assembly. But comments to the Planning and Zoning Commission would be more formal in nature, and so as I understand it, that's where you all would come in as a policy committee, would be receiving those proposed comments from your two advisory committees and working with those, and then forwarding an AMATS set of comments to the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding parking reforms. Thank you so much for your time. Elizabeth and I greatly appreciate it. This is just an initial contact, and we're open to questions, and looking forward to working with AMATS. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions by the committee?
Weddleton has a couple.
Go ahead, sir.
This is all interesting. You know, I see it very closely from two directions. One is someone who's maintains and has a huge amount of parking at my stores. It's frustrating to think I'd rather have my building there so I could sell more stuff. But I also see there that even with substantially more parking provided than is required, I fill it up frequently. And then the neighborhood I live in is actually named after parking. It's Independence Park. And everybody parks independently of any rules everywhere because there's so many cars. And pretty much every house here has, garage and driveway parking for two, but cars are on yards and on streets and sidewalks and so on. So people drive, and there are cars out there, and if they're not given a place to park, they're still going to park their car. So do you have any studies that show that when parking requirements were decreased, that there's actually less driving?
Yes. Now, what we are starting with is basically empirical data as to what the parking demand is under current conditions. And we're also looking at census data. And so where we see that the parking requirement exceeds demand for a majority of developments for a given land use type, most importantly multifamily, that is where we see an opportunity to reduce the requirement, and so we can identify those studies, but basically, when you have a lower parking requirement and a more urban-oriented site development pattern, what we're seeing is we're seeing percentage reductions in parking demand over time. But we can, as we move forward, we can point out those studies. It's different in different parts of town. What we're seeing and studying are differences in basically vehicle ownership rates between census tracts for parts of town. And so the areas that we are really focusing on tend to be the areas where we see lower parking demand and just more transportation alternatives.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate the goal. I'm just nervous that human nature will thwart the plans. And then a quick one. So is this just the bowl, or you got Eagle River and Girdwood being looked at as well?
So as far as the area changes, this particular reform is only within the more urban neighborhoods and the transit support development corridors within the Anchorage Bowl. However, the streamlining of discretionary reductions, review and approval of proposed parking reductions, those would be available throughout the municipality. This reform, by creating sort of a space for area-specific lower parking requirements in targeted areas, it is naturally supportive of, for example, if the Girdwood Land Use Committee, moves forward with proposing some Girdwood-specific changes to its parking requirements, it can, reference code users to Chapter 9 with respect to that. So.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I see there's a comment in the chat from Kyle Fitzpatrick that Christina pasted. So Kyle had asked, let's see, I know that often parking requirements can be pseudoscience and are not based on empirical data. Has there been any consideration of semi-dynamic pricing for parking? And has there been a consideration of reduction for parking requirements for big box stores? And then he noted the high cost of free parking by Donald Shoup. I went to the third point on the book. There's Richard Wilson is I guess I would call him Donald Shoup's protege. We've been using his book, Parking Reform Made Easy, as it had some specific recommendations for municipalities and looking at their parking.
Yeah, and so the Parking Reform Made Easy, that title is a tongue-in-cheek, by the way. The parking reductions that we're proposing include the option to unbundle the cost of parking from the rest of the apartment rent, and so that some cities actually require this now, multifamily, but essentially for households who are renting who don't have a car or have only one car, they aren't paying for the cost of the parking in the development. That's on the on-site side. We also have a commercial version of that. But you know, when Elizabeth showed the slide of a possible expansion of the downtown parking exempt area, where basically we deregulate minimum parking requirements, or even if we take a very aggressive approach to reducing parking requirements to, you know, maybe less than making the minimum parking requirement less than, say, you know, the majority of developments actually currently have parking demand. That is in those two cases, you really are looking at a broader strategy of, you know, like we do in downtown, have parking permits or you know, use-based pricing of parking, and so those are currently limited to downtown. Deregulating parking for an expanded area from downtown into Fairview, as Elizabeth showed. We think that there would need to be a variety of parking management measures and a rethinking of how we manage on-street parking in such an area.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments, any additional questions or comments by the committee on item 7B?
Yes, please. This is Ms. Zalatil. I just wanted to flag an issue that I guess I would be interested in learning the effects about, which would be snow storage. I know that snow storage, you know, on lot for commercial properties is something that they like to do, but and how that intersects with parking minimums now and what that might do if parking minimums weren't required or were reduced. So that's a particular interest. I just wanted to flag the issue.
Yeah, so the snow storage requirement is you know, currently they have a choice as to whether to store the snow or to, you know, have it removed or get rid of it somehow. If they store the snow, the required snow storage area is required. It can overlap with required parking, so if they provide more parking than the minimum requirement, they can designate that area for snow storage. So otherwise, they are hauling. We were able to have a bit lower minimum parking requirements than we used to, particularly because we require snow storage. Before, the minimum parking requirement kind of built in the assumption that they'd be storing snow on site, but the current Title 21 requirements more flexible. If they want to store the snow in a landscaped open space area, or if they want to haul it, then they don't have to, you know, artificially bump up the size of their parking lot. If we reduce minimum parking requirements, theoretically, the snow storage requirement wouldn't change. Obviously, they'd have less snow to store if their parking requirement's smaller, but as a percentage of their parking lot, the snow storage requirement would, basically remain the same.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, or hearing none, does the AMAT staff or committee members have any other general information items to present at this time?
Mr. Chair, I don't, but I believe that we may have some comments from the public on the COVID funding. So there it is. I'll read it. It says from Kyle Fitzpatrick, it says, I think it would be in the spirit of the COVID funds if they were used for bikes, sidewalk, and trail infrastructure that have been a healthy alternative to buses for community and gyms for exercise during COVID. That's the only comment I see.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, at this time, we'll move on to item 8, committee comments. Does the committee have any comments to add today?
Weddleton has a couple things I wanted to bring up.
Yes, sir.
We are working on turning the MTP 2040 into a long-range transportation plan for Anchorage, and Meg and I have tasked ourselves with that, so we're working briskly on it, and I think we have mere weeks. There are a couple of things that kind of as I was just looking at it, and one is, Wolfgang a month or two ago gave a fairly compelling argument or discussion, I think, on, if the highway to highway, whatever, the Glen to the Seward Highway connection were done, that it would pull traffic off of Muldoon Tudor in an appreciable amount, so that at least I think he said Tudor could be narrowed, and that came from that discussion about the dangerous kind of crossings along Tudor, and I wonder, is there like travel studies or something that can support that? Because that would be useful, and it didn't jump out to me if there were, but so that was one thing, and then another thing that we don't have an MTP, but it is not gone, is the connector arm crossing. And I understand there was a study done that was finished, probably a year and a half ago by Kevin Hemingway. And I wondered, is that, and it's been brought up, apparently it was not made public. Is that something that we could get a hold of and find out? It's been quiet since then, so is this not to be considered? It's just never going to happen, or is it still viable? And is that study something we could see? And I don't know who to direct that to. I don't know who has control of those bits of information.
Well, I can try to shed some light on the KAC, actually a little bit of light on both of them, perhaps. The KAC project was recently discussed at quite a length in the department, and the most recent direction we received from the executive branch was to complete the phase that we're currently working on and close it out. And we've gotten permission from FHWA to close out the work that was done initially, or the pre-construction work, and I'm sorry, pre-environmental work, and the PD&E work that was done early on with participation. So the early phases of that has already been closed, and we're just finalizing some right-of-way actions. And once those are wrapped up, that would presumably close out the KAC project as we once knew it. The Hemingway study that you mentioned is indeed difficult to get your hands on. I would like to see a copy of that myself. It's in Juneau, down in headquarters. I'm not sure if it's a document. I guess to be honest with you, I know it exists as well. I have been asking to get a copy of it, which I have yet to receive. So I am continuing to ask to get a copy of that. But I guess on that side, I really don't have an answer as to where it is and who's holding on to it. As far as your comment on the highway to highway or sewer to Glen connection, I believe, from my reference point on that, the best information we could provide is the fact that when you look at the traffic modeling in the municipality, it basically shows that all other major arterials and collectors in the municipality, or all the major roads, operate at a level of service of D or greater. It's been a while since I've looked at it, so Jim or somebody who has some more updated information, please correct me if I'm wrong. But with the highway to highway, or the sewer to Glen, as we are now calling it, that does improve the level of service on all the other major arterials in the Anchorage Bowl.
Okay, so just refer to that. That's fine. I don't know if there had been some actual studies that tested it, but thanks.
Ms. Altel, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I was asked to check in on the status of the what I refer to as the Fairview PEL or the Seward to Glen PEL. If I could get an update, that would be wonderful.
Are you asking for an update for the next policy meeting?
Sure, or if there's just an off the cuff, like did the contract get awarded and it's out the door kind of update, that would be great too.
It's my understanding that the contract has been awarded, and they are, if they haven't finalized the final negotiations, they are currently working on that. But there is a project manager from DOT assigned to that, and they are moving forward.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other comments by the committee or questions? All right, moving on to item 9, public comments. Are there any additional public comments? And we will pause for a few minutes.
No additional public comments.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any objections to approving this motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. The meeting is adjourned. The time is 2:39. Thank you all.
Thank you all.